My parents didn't pay for my university, and now they want me to lend them money to pay for my sister's wedding. I reminded them how they opposed borrowing money when I needed it. I'm 34 years old and work as a software developer. Compared to the rest of my family, I earn much more. My mom is a retired music teacher, and my dad runs a local hardware store. I also have a younger sister, Katarine, who is 30 years old. I haven't been in touch with her for the last 5 years, mainly because she's a spoiled and entitled person since childhood, and my parents did nothing to discourage her behavior. 5 years ago, she brought her new boyfriend to Christmas dinner. I was the host that year, having just moved to a new apartment, and I wanted to do something special. But as usual, Katarine ruined the entire evening by making unnecessary comments about how small and outdated my house was, and how it wasn't even in a good neighborhood. She wouldn't stop bragging about her new boyfriend, who turned out to be quite wealthy and lived in a mansion that was more than 10 times the size of my apartment. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I told her that unlike her boyfriend, I had moved into this apartment on my own and paid the rent by myself, something she and her boyfriend couldn't say. I also told her that if she had such high standards, she should leave my house and never come back. She and her boyfriend obviously got offended because it was all true, and they left. Since then, we've had no contact. My parents have tried many times to get us to reconcile, but I don't want to have anything to do with her anymore. The only reason I had any relationship with her was because of my parents, but I can't keep doing that. It's been 5 years since we last spoke, and recently I found out that she got engaged to the same guy from 5 years ago, and they're getting married in a few months. My parents, being foolish, insisted on covering the cost of the venue and decorations for the wedding because they didn't want to fall short compared to the groom's parents. I think it was a pretty dumb move on their part because, first of all, they should have known that their daughter had expensive tastes and that it would be far beyond their budget. Second, they literally had no way of competing with the groom's parents, as they were much more financially stable than our family. I don't even know what they were thinking, but they had already made the commitment, and the wedding was only a few months away. Of course, with what my sister was planning, my parents realized they couldn't afford to cover everything since her wedding plans were way beyond their budget. A few days ago, they came to me asking for a loan. Although we've had a good relationship in recent years, I had to refuse them because of something that happened years ago. The reason I'm asking now if I did the right thing is because many relatives have told me that I'm being petty, and I really don't think so. When I was about to graduate high school and start university, my parents told me they wouldn't cover my tuition or any other expenses because now that I was 18, I was on my own. I was a bit surprised because they had always supported me a lot, so this seemed out of character. They told me that in their time, they had to take care of themselves after turning 18 because their parents couldn't afford their expenses once they became adults. Apparently this made them very strong and independent, and they wanted me to do the same. They hadn't set aside any money for me or my sister. They wanted us to work through university like they did. My career wasn't easy, so I didn't want to waste time working while studying because I wasn't sure I could maintain my grades. University is expensive, so no effort would have been enough. I suggested we take out a student loan, but my parents disagreed. Even when I suggested borrowing money from relatives and paying them back later, they said it was insulting to even suggest it. They told me it was against their principles to ask for money. I remember arguing with them a lot about this specific issue. In the end, I managed to get my grandparents to help me get a student loan. That's how I graduated. I was really angry with my parents at the time for this, but eventually, I forgave them. That doesn't mean I've completely forgotten about it. My sister never had this problem because she didn't even go to university. She didn't think it was necessary because she knew she would just take over my dad's business in the future, or she would just get married. And that's exactly what she's doing, so good for her. Anyway, the conclusion is that I remember what my parents said about borrowing money when I suggested we could take out a loan for my education. They said no because it went against their principles. So now, according to their principles, they should still be against borrowing money when it comes to my university funds. All they cared about were their principles. But now that Katarine wants to get married and have a big wedding, suddenly they've forgotten all about that. I thought that was very convenient for them, and I wasn't going to let it slide because they had caused me so much trouble back then. I really don't think my sister's wedding is more important than my university education, because if I hadn't been able to finish my degree and get the grades I did, I probably wouldn't have this job, and I probably wouldn't even be in a position to help them financially. So when they came to me asking for help, I reminded them of what they had said about loans and borrowing money and how it went against their principles. They were a bit stunned because I don't think they expected me to remember all of this, even after so many years, but I remembered it quite clearly. After talking to them, they had nothing to say and just went home in silence. I thought that would be the end of it, but then a lot of relatives started contacting me and telling me that the way I treated my parents was very humiliating for them, and they were very upset about it. Apparently, my parents had told everyone that I had changed after making so much money, and now I was holding it against them, trying to belittle them even after everything they had done for me. I didn't think that was an accurate representation of what I had done at all. I had just fought against something I felt was unfair, and that was it. So I ended up not talking to my parents at all. If they really had a problem with what I said, they should have confronted me right there instead of going behind my back and complaining to the rest of the family. I didn't speak to the rest of the family either, because if they didn't understand where I was coming from, I had nothing more to say to them. Anyway, it's not like they invited me to my sister's wedding, so I didn't think I needed to contribute in any way. In the last few days, I haven't had any contact with my parents or anyone else in the family. I've been quite happy about that because I don't think I did anything wrong. But 2 days ago, my parents visited me again, and this time they were very upset. They told me that apparently, because of me, they had been uninvited from my sister's wedding. I don't understand how I could have done that since I haven't had any contact with Katerine at all, but they told me that when they were told they wouldn't be able to finance the wedding and that they needed some help from her and her in-laws to cover the costs they couldn't afford, she lost it and started pushing them to get the money somehow. Because at this stage, if she was going to ask for financial help from her in-laws, it would make her family look really bad, and she didn't want that. She was somewhat right because if my parents weren't sure they could cover the full cost of what they had committed to, they shouldn't have made the commitment in the first place. Generally, she's very spoiled and has a sense of superiority, but I don't think she was wrong in what she said here. Personally, I think she and her fiancé should have covered the full cost between them since their family is rich enough to pay for it. But if my parents had committed to something, they should follow through, and she was right in that they were making them look bad in front of her in-laws. So I would say she had every right to be upset, and I told my parents that. I told them I had nothing to do with this because I hadn't told them to make such a commitment. They were the ones who asked for it. They were just looking for someone to blame, and part of it is their fault. At this point, I would definitely say that uninviting them completely from the wedding was an overreaction on my sister's part. But then again, what did they expect from Katerine? She's always been like this, and they're responsible for that, not me. However, my parents just weren't ready to listen, and they kept insisting that if I had just helped them and lent them some money instead of being so petty and holding on to old grudges, they wouldn't be in this situation now. I thought it was very unfair that they blamed me, and I asked them to leave, which they did, but they kept insisting. Now, the entire family has turned against me, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. Personally, I don't think I did anything wrong, but anyway, I'm the bad guy here for refusing to contribute to my sister's wedding because my parents can't afford it. Update 1. So, I've decided to cut all contact with my entire family. The crazy part is that both my father's and mother's sides of the family are united against me right now, except for my grandparents. Obviously, my maternal grandparents are no longer around, but my paternal grandparents are on my side and they've been trying to keep the peace in the family. But even they are starting to get tired of all this drama. Everyone in the family has had differences in the past, but I guess their hatred for me has brought them together. Well, at least I'm glad I've done something good for the family. But now, I've blocked everyone, and I really don't want any drama at the moment. Someone in the comments suggested that maybe the real reason everyone seems to hate me so much and needs a reason to turn against me is probably because they're jealous, and I think that's a pretty valid point. I don't want to praise myself, but I'm doing much better than most people in my family, and I don't think they can stand it. I never really followed anyone's advice while growing up, and most people told me to just get a business degree and take over my father's business because that's where the future was, instead of constantly being in front of a computer. And guess what? That's exactly how I make my living now. The fact is, I'm much more successful than most of my cousins, and not only are they jealous of me, but their parents seem to resent me too. It just doesn't make sense to me because I believe families should be happy for each other's successes and share in that joy, but that's never been the case. Sometimes it really saddens me, but I can't help it. Some people are just like that. I bet my parents are already enjoying the fact that everyone is against me right now because, according to them, I'm the one who uninvited them from my sister's wedding. We haven't spoken since they came last time to accuse me of ruining their relationship with my sister, which I still don't understand. But my grandparents have told me that they're not speaking to them either. Since my grandparents are on my side, it just shows how ungrateful they really are. My grandparents have helped them so much in the past, and still, they don't seem to remember any of that. And that makes me quite happy that I didn't help them when they came to me, because I'm pretty sure they would have conveniently forgotten about it in the future. They take everything for granted, and it's about time someone teaches them a lesson, even if it has to be someone as awful as Katerine. Update 2. Yesterday, something really strange happened. I was really busy, so I couldn't share it here, but Katerine came to visit me after I got back from work. She arrived about an hour later, and it really surprised me because, as I think I mentioned, we haven't spoken to each other in the last 5 years, and we don't have a good relationship. I was pretty sure she was here to talk about her wedding with me because, now that our parents aren't even invited, I'm sure she needs money. But she was smart enough not to start with that. Instead, she told me she was here to apologize for everything she had done in the past. She said she was about to start a new chapter in her life by getting married and wanted to extend a formal invitation to me before anyone else, to make up for her past behavior. She claimed she really regretted being a spoiled child, but that it wasn't entirely her fault because our parents never said anything about her behavior either. So, she grew up thinking she was acting in a normal and acceptable way in society. But now that she had grown up, she knew she had been a terrible person, and she was trying to make amends with everyone she had hurt in the past. She thought there was no one better than me to start with, since, as her brother, I had to put up with her more than anyone. I let her talk, and once she finished her little speech, I told her I was fine with it, and was glad she finally came to her senses and apologized. But I knew there was more to come, and I was waiting for it patiently. Of course, then she started telling me how she knew that our parents had also been horrible to me because she had heard from other relatives what they had been saying about me, that I was selfish, heartless, and petty just because I refused to contribute to her wedding. She tried to flatter me and said that I was absolutely right in what I had said because, at the end of the day, they never helped me after I turned 18, and they were the ones who promised to help her pay for the wedding. So, it wasn't my responsibility to save them when they were in trouble, especially considering the fact that we didn't have a good relationship to begin with. I knew she was preparing to ask for something, so I just waited for her to finally say it. After a while, she finally told me that now that our parents weren't invited, they had withdrawn the funds they had promised so long ago. She started ranting about how unfair that was because they were the ones who said they would cover at least some of the expenses, and now she was too embarrassed to go to her fiancé and tell him that, after the fight with her parents, they wouldn't be covering anything, and her parents would have to pay for everything. So she was here to ask me if I would be willing to help her in this difficult moment, just this once, and she would be grateful for the rest of her life. She even told me she was willing to sign a contract or whatever it took to make sure I knew she would pay me back eventually, hopefully by the end of the year, but she just needed my help right now to save her from the embarrassment of telling her fiancé all of this. I found it interesting that she was willing to promise to pay the money back and was even willing to involve documents because that would make it quite official. But I told her I needed time to think about it because in the end, even though she had apologized, we still weren't exactly on good terms, and our relationship was still very tense. I thought she would understand, but she turned out to be quite shameless and told me I was being very stingy and that it wasn't much she was asking for, as her sister. That was quite ironic coming from her since, for the last 5 years, we hadn't had any relationship at all, let alone one like that of sisters. From the beginning, I knew she was only here to ask for money, not for her apology. I told her that she was just like our parents, selfish and always looking out for their own benefit. Of course, she got angry with me after that and started shouting at me, but I'm not my parents. I had no reason to tolerate that, and I immediately told her to leave my house because I wasn't going to put up with that kind of behavior. At first, she refused to leave, but I grabbed her by the arm and forcibly took her out. She kept saying she would call the police for attacking her, but I didn't care. Eventually, she left, and I was pretty upset for a while. But now it's just a stupidly funny incident for me, and I won't let it affect me. Update 3. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and I just assumed that since my sister and I were still at odds, the invitation she had extended to me had been revoked. But today, I was pleasantly surprised to receive an invitation to her wedding. I didn't know how to process it, so I decided to contact her. At first, she didn't respond, but a few hours later, she finally called me back. She was pretty brief on the phone when I thanked her for inviting me. So I decided to ask her what exactly was going on because I was pretty confused. She told me that on that day, she had wanted to apologize, and that she was truly trying to be a better person now. She had also managed to get the money for the wedding by herself, so she didn't need help from anyone anymore. But she wanted me to know that she wasn't pretending to be nice just to get my money, and that she meant every word she said that day. She also told me that our parents had actually made her realize how spoiled she had been in the past, and she was working really hard not to become like them. At this point, I decided to ask her if she was planning to invite them as well, and she told me that, unlike what they were saying to people, she had never uninvited them. They had actually put themselves in a very difficult position. Apparently, our parents had never had any idea what my sister wanted for her wedding. From the beginning, she warned them that what she was planning was pretty grand and that she didn't think they had enough money to cover it all, but they were very confident about it. So after talking so big, it would have been really embarrassing for her to go to her fiancé and tell him that, after the fight with our parents, they couldn't actually pay for what they had promised. The fact that they didn't even bother to think things through and were so determined to compete with her in-laws was what really upset her. And since she had been yelling at them, they were the ones who decided that she no longer wanted them at her wedding and uninvited themselves. She hadn't even said that. She hadn't even hinted at it. But they came to that conclusion on their own and have been doing the exact same thing with me. Rather than confronting her and talking to her about it, they decided to talk to everyone else about it. I have to admit, it's really twisted that they're telling people that their kids are so terrible when they themselves don't even bother to clarify things with us when they have the chance. Of course, after they've said such horrible things about us to everyone else, we're not going to be very inclined to fix things with them. And yet, they'll find a way to blame us. They just want to play the victim constantly, and I'm glad that my sister is finally seeing that now. Katarine told me that the rest of the family hadn't excluded her the way they did with me, but she was still thinking about whether or not she wanted to invite them because they seemed pretty sure they were on my parents' side. With me, they were really unpleasant, but with her, most of them were still trying to explain why my parents were right instead of directly accusing her of anything. I think it might have something to do with the fact that my parents are too proud to apologize, but they're not too proud to live off their kids in the future. And since my grandparents won't help them anymore, at least they need Katarine on their side to keep that door open. That's just my theory, though. I'm not really sure what's going on, but I know they're treating Katarine very differently than how they treated me. And it's sad, but it's not something I'm not used to. At least Katarine is starting to see the truth now, and if she's really trying to be a better person, I think I'm going to give her a chance. After talking on the phone, she apologized for making a scene the other day too, and she said she'd really be happy to have me at the wedding because at least someone from the family should be there. I haven't decided yet if I want to go or not, but I'm going to wait a couple of days before I contact her again about whether I'll attend or not. It's not easy to repair a relationship that's been broken for 5 years, but I don't want to be the kind of person who always holds grudges and never lets anything go. That would be miserable. So I even discussed this with my grandparents, and they told me that if I decide to go, they will attend as well. They weren't sure if they wanted to go or not before, but given the current circumstances, they might want to. It seems that Katarine is reconsidering her relationship with the rest of the family and might not invite them. Update 4. Yesterday, I attended Katarine's wedding. Well, saying that I attended might be misleading. I actually walked her down the aisle. Our parents, unfortunately, didn't apologize to her. They didn't even communicate with her before the wedding, which is why they weren't invited. She was very upset about that for a few days before the wedding, and she contacted me to ask if I would be willing to walk her down the aisle because she really needed someone there for emotional support. I instantly agreed because, no matter what had happened in the past, no one deserves to be treated like that, especially by their own parents over some silly fight. I always knew it would be much easier for my parents to distance themselves emotionally from me because my sister was always the golden child. But seeing this side of them and realizing that they were too proud and selfish to even fix their relationship with the only daughter that had mattered in their entire lives, it was simply beneath them. They are part of the reason why my sister was such a terrible person in the past. No one ever bothered to correct her behavior as parents should have, but they never seemed to care about how she acted and always thought it was a good idea to let her be, which turned her into a spoiled brat. I'm not saying it's entirely their fault, but they could have done something to stop it, and they didn't. Anyway, when Katarine asked me to walk her down the aisle, I accepted, and she really seemed grateful for it. Even the few family members she invited to the wedding declined the invitation. I guess everyone wants to support my parents and be part of the drama. However, I managed to get my grandparents to attend, and she apologized to all of us before the ceremony. Her fiancé also apologized to me for how he had behaved toward me all those years ago. Katarine told me that she had told her fiancé the whole truth about the situation with our parents, and he told her not to worry about the money. He would take care of everything. That's how it worked for them. She almost broke down before the ceremony because our parents wouldn't be there, but her fiancé, our grandparents, and I told her not to let them ruin such a special day for her. I wouldn't say everything is perfect now, but we're going to work on it and try to improve things for the future. I really am willing to believe that she's changed as a person, and when I saw her yesterday, I truly believe she was telling the truth about wanting to start over. So, many people may not agree with my decision, but I believe I'm doing the right thing. Update 5. I'm back here after more than a year, or maybe 2. I haven't checked when the last update was, but I have very good news about my sister. She's a mother now. She had her daughter a month ago. Thinking back and remembering everything we went through with our parents at her wedding, I remembered this post. Neither of us has spoken to our parents since, and they still haven't met their granddaughter. The ones who have gone to visit her are my grandparents, who are now great-grandparents. I wish this were a happy update from the perspective that everything is better with my parents, but it certainly isn't. We've come to terms with the fact that our parents are not in our lives, and that's how we live now. I don't even think apologies at this point would do any good because throughout all this time, they haven't been able to come close and try to fix things. But it's fine. Some people grow up without parents and turn out okay. After all, when it's my turn to be a father, I'll surely take everything I've experienced with them into account and use it to be a better parent. I think that's the least I owe to my future children, and also to my niece as an uncle.